Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli back out here in the shop with a brand new video for you today. And in today's shop, we're talking about a relatively new technique, a relatively new style to catch fish called mid-strolling or mid-depth strolling. Mid-strolling, mid-depth strolling. You know, the interesting thing about this technique is it's an amazing technique to catch suspended fish. Now, you hear that term all the time, suspended fish, and it's associated with tough fish. But the great thing about this mid-strolling is that those fish, although they're tough to catch with a lot of other techniques, this mid-strolling really activates those fish and makes them want to bite. I'm excited about this technique. I think with the advent of forward-facing sonar, with the advent of some new baits and rigging techniques, mid-strolling, mid-depth strolling is really going to take off. This is really going to be a technique that you see in the next couple years become a staple for guys. So today's shop, we're going to talk all about it. Let's start with the baits. We're going to talk about the baits. Then we're going to get into how to fish this technique, the retrieve style. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the gear and the rods and reels that I like. Let's start with the bait. So for mid-strolling, guys, 100%, this is a bait fish oriented lure. This is a lure that we're going to pick that mimics bait fish style forage. So if you're watching this and you live in a place that, of course, has shad or herring or alewife or smelt or Cisco or shiners or any of those forage species, bait fish forage, especially those when those bait fish are suspended. Dude, this is lights out. Okay, so knowing that this is a bait fish forage technique, we're going to pick lures that imitate that forage. You know, two of my favorites for this mid-strolling technique are Minnow or fluke style baits. Minnow or fluke style baits. Really, really love the 3 to 4 inch minnow baits using this mid-strolling more finesse, okay? 3 to 4 inch minnow style baits, 1000% guys, this has been the one for me. And a lot of reasons. I'm going to talk to you why. This is the Flatnose minnow. This is a Berkley Maxscent bait. It's a 4-inch bait. But if you look at that lure, one of the reasons I love it for mid-depth strolling is it's got a flatter bottom to it. Then it really tapers and thins out. And then if you look at the tail on this Maxscent Flatnose minnow, if you look at that tail, it is forked, but it's in the anatomically correct position, right? It's the way that a tail is on a fish. And for this technique, and when I get into the retrieve, I'm really going to talk about why I like that tapered end, that flat bottom, and I really like that forked, anatomically correct forked tail. Flatnose minnow, 100% is a great one. 3, 4-inch minnow style bait. And the jig head, listen, your favorite jig head from 1/8 of an ounce all the way up to 3/8. But when I'm using that 3 or 4-inch minnow, Maxscent minnow, I really like the 3/16 or the 1/4 ounce. They're my two favorite sizes for this mid-strolling. Here's the only thing I want you guys to remember. No, I don't care what jig head you pick. I like the jig heads that have a 90-degree line tie. Real simple. And so the line tie on that, I want it straight up and down, perpendicular to the bend of the hook. Okay, so 90-degree line tie. And what that's going to do, it's going to help keep that bait horizontal, and it's going to help that bait track true. Okay, so your favorite jig head, 3 to 4 inch minnow, that's the first bait I'm using for this mid strolling. All right, the next one is, it's also a good technique with a bigger minnow size bait. So now this next category to me is that a 5 to 6 inch minnow style baits. And you know, this kind of proves that this mid strolling is not just a finesse technique, because this has got a little more power to it. But I go to this bigger minnow bait on this technique when the forage is bigger, right? So think about that. Dude, if all your shad and stuff and shiners, minnows are little, that's the one you want to use. If you're fishing a place where you got herring that are real long, 4, 5, 6 inch long herring, go to a bigger bait. Cisco, go to a bigger bait, right? You know, those forage that are longer, you want to mimic that. So again, a minnow style bait, a fluke style bait. I love this one. This is the Berkley Powerbait Jerk Shad. You've heard me do these shops on this other styles. Guess what? It's just as good on this mid strolling technique. Love the shad baitfish profile colors. This one's like an alewife. This is called albino. It's an alewife looking color. I really like, guys, the jig heads that have a screw lock system in them. There's a bunch of different ones on the market. The screw lock on this mid strolling helps lock in that minnow. So I like those screw lock jig heads, but remember, 90-degree line tie. Get one with that 90-degree, almost straight up and down line tie. That's going to help. So bigger flukes. And then last but not least, and we're going to talk about that retrieve. Last but not least, this is one of the baits that just came out that is dead nuts perfect for mid strolling. And this is a Berkley Powerbait switch. And here's the great thing about this switch, guys, and I actually have one tied on this rod, is this lure was designed to do a lot of different stuff. I can moke this, I can jig it, light jig it, I could rip it, I can do a lot of things with it. But this Powerbait, Berkley Powerbait switch is perfect for mid strolling. And the way that bait is designed, okay, first of all, look at the jig head, 90-degree line tie. And the line tie set back in the bait. And by the way, these switches come pre-rigged. So the plastic, the Powerbait, is molded around the jig head. Okay, so there's no rigging. We don't have to rig it. We take it out of the pack, we tie it on. But that line ties 90 degrees and it's set back in the head. And then the other thing that's great, and it's harder to tell on these solid baits, but the lead head is broad and it's flat on the bottom. And that really helps us when we're using this mid-strolling technique. Now, when I get into the retrieves on these baits, the retrieve for mid-strolling with the switch is a little different than the retrieve with those other two minnow style baits. But it's just as effective, maybe even more effective. So Berkley Powerbait switch, this comes in a lot of sizes, guys, but same deal. Excuse me, 1/8. Oh my God. Sorry. Oh my God. Cut! All right, sorry about that, guys. the great thing about this Powerbait switch is it comes in a lot of sizes, but we're gonna stick to them same parameters. An 1/8 all the way up to a 3/8. And listen, pick the weight size dependent on the depth of the fish, right? All right, guys, with sizes of the switch, just like the other minnow style baits, this thing comes in a lot of sizes, but we're gonna stick in those same parameters. An 1/8 of an ounce, all the way up to 3/8 of an ounce. And pick the weight that matches the level of the fish, right? So a lighter weight for those shallower fish, you know, the 1/8, the 3/16, shallower in the water column. 1/4 ounce, 5/16, a little bit deeper in the water column. And then a 3/8 for when they're really deep, right? They're deeper in the column. So it comes in a lot of different weight sizes. All right, let's get to this technique. And this is really the magic of mid-depth strolling or mid-strolling. This is the magic, is how to fish this bait. And for the two minnow style baits, whether we're doing a 3 or a 4-inch, I love that Maxscent minnow, Flatnose minnow, or whether we're doing a 5 or a 6-inch with more of a traditional fluke, we're gonna get this thing to come through those suspended fish, and we want this bait to roll and shimmer as it's coming through. So we're actually gonna use a lot of slack in our line as we're retrieving. Now I know what you're thinking. That's a hard thing to do, because having slack and shaking at the same time while you're retrieving is tough to do. But when we do that minnow bait that's coming through those suspended fish is literally rolling back and forth, and it's shaking. And that's the movement that makes those suspended fish bite. Those same fish that you reeled a crankbait through and couldn't get them to bite. Those same fish that you burned a spinnerbait through or whatever, right? That movement, that rolling, shaking movement through those suspended fish, that is what mid-strolling is all about, okay? So for the two minnow baits, we're gonna use our rod and our reel to make that action happen, okay? So I've got on that 4-inch Maxscent minnow. I make a really long cast past where I see the fish. And I'm looking at 2D side imaging, but I'm really looking at forward-facing sonar to determine where they're at. So let's say they're 10 feet down. So making a really long cast past those fish, I kind of count it down. I'm watching it on forward-facing sonar, count about 10 seconds, get it to that zone of the fish or where the bait's at. And then once it's there, you ready? I've got my rod call it about 2 o'clock rod position, and I'm reeling and shaking at the same time. And when I'm reeling, I'm not burning it, because I want that bait to maintain that level, right? If I were to reel fast, it's going to lift. So I'm slowly reeling and shaking my rod tip at the same time. And it's not like I'm ripping it. I'm literally doing like little shakes, little rod movements. But that's where that slack part comes in, guys, because as I'm reeling and shaking, every time that rod tip lifts and falls, it's throwing little pulses of slack into it. And when that pulse of slack gets into it, the bait goes left, right, left, right. And that's where you get that roll. And you also get a little head kick, okay? Great movement, guys. So long cast, getting it to the level of the fish, watching my forward-facing sonar. Once I'm there, slow retrieve as I'm just doing this little shake with my rod tip. Every once in a while, as I'm watching that bait, if it's rising a little too much, I'll kill it And when I kill it, I just bow to it to let it fall back down to that level, and then I start again, okay? Every once in a while, that pause will initiate a strike, but most of those strikes are just like that. You know, it's a lot like patting your head and rubbing your belly, right? It takes some practice. But once you get that rhythm down, that movement of these two baits is what really triggers the fish. Even this bigger bait, guys, a 5-inch fluke on a 5/16 or a 1/4 ounce head, it's perfect. 3/8 head, perfect, because I'm getting that roll and I'm getting that little head bounce, okay? That's the movement for mid-strolling, for mid-depth strolling that triggers those suspended fish. All right, but here's the difference. Now listen to me. This is where this bait right here is special, because when I'm using the Berkley Powerbait switch, I'm actually fishing it a little different than I would with that traditional minnow rig, right? The minnow style baits that I had to rig on the jig head, I'm going to fish this switch a little different. And here it goes. Got my switch on. Same thing. I'm picking the weight to get to the level of the fish. Everything's the same so far. I'm making my long cast past the fish that I see on forward facing. I'm counting it down to the level of the fish, counting to 8, counting to 12, whatever level they're at, watching it on forward facing. But with the switch, once I reach that level, you ready? Here's all I'm doing. I'm just reeling this one, guys, because this switch has a built-in action that you don't need to use your rod tip. You heard me talk about that flat head and that line tie, 90-degree line tie that's way pushed back in the bait. Well, it also has, you almost want to call it like a little spade tail that's horizontal to the bait. I hope you guys can see that. It's a little spade tail. It's not a tab tail. It's not a kicker tail. It's a little tail that's flat in line with the bait. It's horizontal. When I reel the Berkley Powerbait switch, rod's at 2, and I'm just reeling it real slow, I'm not shaking it, this bait is wandering left and right. A lot like the roll of the minnow, except I don't have to impart the action. It's unbelievable, guys. It's a very unique motion with this switch. So long cast, count it to the level of the fish, the level of the bait, put my rod at 2, and with the Berkley Powerbait switch for mid-strolling, I'm just reeling it through the level of the fish. If it starts to rise every once in a while, I'll kill it, bow to it to let it fall back down, and then I start my retrieve again. So same technique, little bit different retrieve, and I'm letting the bait make that rolling movement on its own. And it's a lot of that left-right rolling that the switch does all by itself. Okay, last but not least, guys, on this mid-strolling technique, let's talk about the tackle, the rod, the reel, and the line. And for me, it's basically the same whether I'm using that little 3 or 4-inch Maxscent Flatnose minnow, or I'm using the bigger 5 and 6-inch flukes on a heavier head, and the switch. It's the same setup. And it is a longer spinning rod, okay? 7.4 to 7.6 spinning rod. And there's not a lot of those out there, but Abu Garcia's got some really good ones. 7.4 to 7.6 medium action spinning rod. Real easy, guys. Just a medium action, straight up, old school medium action spinning rod. So longer, medium action spinning rod. A 30 or a 40 or a 3,000 or 4,000 size spinning reel, depending on the brand you use. I'm a huge fan of the Rocket. And not because it's easier to do that methodical, slow retrieve. Not because of that. It's because of the ability to burn it back in and make another cast. So let me explain that real quick. So in mid-strolling, I'm using that forward-facing sonar. I'm watching that bait come through the water column. If all of a sudden I'm watching and I pan a little left and I see one show up that I didn't cast to, that rocket lets me burn it back in, make another cast, and stroll it, mid-stroll it through that fish or that group of fish that I see. So I like these reels, spinning reels, that have a faster gear ratio. Okay, a little bit bigger reel, a little bit faster gear ratio. All right, last but not least, you see the line connection right there, guys. Mid-depth strolling is 100% better when you're using a braid to a longer fluorocarbon leader. But light braid, there's no need to overpower this with heavy braid. So I'm using 8 to 12 pound braided line. This is Berkley X5. I love it in 10. And I also like to use a braid that you can see. So your whites, your yellows, your green, or bright green, something that shows up. And then I'm going to a 4 to 6 foot leader of fluorocarbon. 6 pound, all the way up to 12 pound, but I love the 8 pound Berkley Trilene 100% fluorocarbon. And that's really important because I think a lot of those suspended fish, especially in clear water, will see braid. So I don't want that braid anywhere near the bait. And I also like the fluorocarbon because it helps that bait get a little bit better of that roll, right? If I were to tie straight to braid, it's going to take away a little bit of that roll. But having that longer fluorocarbon leader is going to enhance that roll, okay? So long 7.4 to 7.6 medium action spinning rod, bigger, fast gear ratio spinning reel, light braid to light fluorocarbon on all 3 of these baits. That's the correct gear for this technique. Listen to me. If you fish with forward-facing sonar, if you're seeing suspended fish, if you fish in clear water where the fish suspend around bait fish a lot, you are missing the boat if you don't try this technique. It's called mid-strolling, mid-depth strolling. Give it a try. And try that Powerbait switch. Very unique bait with a unique movement, almost, in my opinion, built especially for this technique. I hope you like this in the shop, talking about mid-strolling. Man, if you like what you're watching, hit the subscribe button. Subscribe to this channel. If you do that, we're going to send you a notification. We've got new content launching every single week. If you happen to already be a subscriber, tell your buddies, tell your fishing friends about the channel. We're here to hopefully help you learn a little bit and become a better angler. Give it a try. Mid-depth strolling out in the shop. Bye. Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli. I hope you enjoyed this week's In the Shop. I hope you learned a little bit. And if you like these videos, remember, there's a whole boatload. Check out these 2 and you're going to learn more about bass fishing.